Hello, good evening. Welcome to the first in a new series from Embley. I do sound a little bit like a TV pundit when I said that. So lessons from our kitchen table. Well, I think we've all spent a lot of time around various kitchen tables, mostly our own, with children learning and understanding the curriculum. Our focus here this evening even, is just to look at one of the most significant, most fundamental aspects of a child's learning, how they learn to read. And it's crucial, isn't it? Because if you think back to where we started to read, it is the single most significant piece that actually opens up a window of wonder. But not just that, it opens up every possible window from everything that we do. The facility to read is so fundamental, so important. So Shane is going to go through our approach to working with the children, to developing reading, to developing a culture and a habit of reading that will stay with them and bring them pleasure for the rest of their lives. So with very little further ado, I'll go straight across to Shana and she'll take you through the reading programme.
Thank you very much, Cliff. Okay, so we wanted this new series to be slightly different from our Meet the Head series that we've done over the past few months. The focus will be on providing top tips to support your child as they progress in reading, writing and mathematics. So the aim being to provide tangible and takeaway tips and ideas which will help with a range of learning moments, whether that be supporting your child with phonics and early reading, or helping your child to respond in year 6 to inference questions in their comprehension work. So it feels like the right time to be sharing some thoughts to help and support you. And our first workshop on reading starts with a focus on supporting your child with phonics and early reading, and a short clip where I caught up with Catherine Steinbrecher, our reception teacher at Embley. With Catherine Steinbrecher, who's our fabulous reception teacher, and she's got a few pieces of support and top tips to give you, and I'm going to ask her some questions which she's going to then respond to, so that hopefully we can give you a little bit of help and support at home.
But what we want to do is just build children's confidence up and get them to see new words and experience new texts. So I wouldn't say there's anything specific you have to read, or you have to read this to help your child progress. Actually, read lots of stories to your children, have words around, talk about words. That's a really important thing, I think, is having conversations with new words, talking about the sounds that you hear, reading road signs, reading cereal boxes, reading loo roll packets while you're in the bathroom. All of those things, picking out sounds where you can, is a really good way to support your child at home, really. So that was kind of my first key tip, is actually you don't have to do it as an intensive sit down, you have to write these sounds. Actually, there are sounds everywhere. You will find them in all of your rooms in your house, so actually use that. It doesn't have to be prescriptive or kind of academic in that sense. Actually, phonics is everywhere, and so there's lots of different things you can do in that sense. Again, if you're cooking at home and you need recipes or things like that, actually to get your child to read the first letter of all the ingredients, just something very simple like that. They've then taken part in it, and then you can do that activity together. And then maybe say you need eggs, for example, that's a really good word to then split and go egg, or what does that word make? And actually they know they've got an egg in front of them, so it's an egg. That will support them. I think there's lots of ways as well that we can support children using pictures, using games like matching pair games. Again, very simple. You can make them just on paper, or you can put posters up around your house. Again, I'm very aware that you're all living in the same 4 walls, so you don't want to redecorate your own houses, but actually just post-it notes is a really easy way. Post-it notes of different sounds on your mirror while you're brushing your teeth. All those things to just reinforce different sounds in everyday life, really.
Fantastic. And I think you touched on sort of books and enjoying books and literature, and actually visual literacy is sometimes sort of forgotten as to help develop comprehension skills. That's something I'll touch on a bit later, but to talk about what the picture's telling you, so that story it's telling you. I can see you scrubbing for a resource. What have you remembered?
I've just found something else. I've got this book that I'm using at the moment called Mixed Up Fairy Tales, and so in this book it's got lots of like flat pictures. And obviously the words are quite hard for the children, but they've got the pictures here. And actually, Again, for this, I'm not expecting them to be able to read the word Goldilocks, but they could recognise the G and match it to the Goldilocks word. And again, these are all texts that they know well. Again, I would encourage you to read traditional tales to your kids, to read kind of fairy stories, and encourage them to make up their own stories with them. Actually, they don't have to read the words that are on the page. Using pictures to create their own stories is a great way to develop their confidence in reading as well. Sorry to interrupt you, Shona.
No, that's perfect. And actually that segues beautifully, because one of the things we're going to be doing is actually publishing reading lists for different year groups throughout the school. And the first one is actually classic fiction. So so hopefully that help and advice has been really useful, and hopefully also the reading list that's going to be published will be a good support too. So thank you, Catherine, for your time. Much appreciated. Thank you. Okay, so a more 3D version of me to continue. So one of the books that was recommended there is a really super one actually for traditional tales with reception, called Mixed Up Fairy Tales. But as Catherine said, phonics and early reading is all about building confidence, and phonics can be found all around us. It's important to enjoy literacy in all of its forms. So whether that's reading road signs, recipes, it's all around us. And young children are full of enthusiasm, and sometimes that enthusiasm for daily reading at home continues to around 7 years old, but it can wane as your children's interests get broader and they're busier and family life gets busier. So how do we continue to support our children to progress with their reading at home? Developing reading skills is about continuing to be systematic. So just as we do with phonics teaching, there are many practical ways that you can help to support your child with both their reading and their comprehension as well. If I could have the next slide, please. One resource which is excellent for supporting reading both at school and at home is called Vipers, and it's from the Literacy Shed. These are targeted prompts and questions which focus on the development of specific skills and specific reading comprehension skills. And you can use them when listening to your child read, and you can ask them targeted questions. So breaking these strands down, this is what they look like. So V stands for vocabulary, so giving or explaining the meaning of the word in context. I, inference, make inference from the text and also explain and justify giving the evidence, which is one of the harder ones. Predict, what might happen from the details stated and implied. E for explain, so how that content is related and contributes to the meaning as a whole. R, retrieve, and so it's retrieving and recording key information and key details. So the precision of that's really important. And then finally S for summarise, so summarising main ideas from more than one paragraph. If I could have the next slide, please. So let's start with V. Being vocabulary rich is hugely important, not just in English, but across the subjects. Therefore, building on vocabulary and understanding its use in context is really important. It's a really important part of reading in years 3 to 6. So when listening to your child read, some of the questions you may ask are: find one word in the text which means, and that would be finding a synonym, so a word that's similar, or what do the following words suggest about the character, setting and mood? Here's an example of how to tackle a vocabulary question. If I could have the next slide, please. Imagine you've read a text about Britain being covered in snow and the city grinding to a halt. Take a look at the short excerpt above and think about how you would tackle the question. So the excerpt reads: snowbound Britain, road, rail and airport bosses face anger as services grind to a halt. The comprehension question is then: why is grind to a halt an effective phrase? So the first thing you do would be to make sure you understood the vocabulary. A top tip for helping your child with a question like this, if one or more words are unfamiliar because the vocabulary doesn't always make sense to them, is to look at the context. So find that word, look around the word within the sentence or even in the paragraph. So is there information which will help you to deduce what the word means? So tell your child not to despair if they don't recognise a word in a question. Being a text detective can help. So that's one top tip there. There are two main words in this quote. So you know you're looking for a definition or word that means grind and a definition or word that means halt. In order to figure out if it's an effective phrase, you also need to know what the words mean in context. So what is grinding to a halt? Why would this phrase be effective in this context? So let's have a look at this technique for answering the question in action. If I can have the next slide, please. You're going to use a synonym for grind, a synonym for halt, so a word that's similar, and then use context to expand on whether or not this is an effective phrase to explain snowbound Britain. Now, often at school we use something called waggles, which is what a good one looks like, and this is a waggle answer. So we start with the context because it shows how extreme the problem is. Then we tackle the vocabulary. Grind means to reduce to a small amount. Halt means to bring an abrupt stop. And then the explanation, which draws it all together and details why this is an effective phrase. So the full answer to why is grind to a halt an effective phrase is because it shows how extreme the problem is. Grind means to reduce to a small amount. Halt means to bring to an abrupt stop. Britain has heavy snow and people are angry because the services have come to an abrupt stop and been ground to nothing, which is why this is an effective phrase. So that's an example from one of the Year 6 responses. I was quite impressed by it as well. OK, can I have the next slide, please? Next on the list is inference. Now, for those who like order, I'm going to spoil things a little bit and throw in explain as well, as they often go hand in hand. Inference is all about looking for hints and clues, where the author shows rather than tells. It's not just about making inference, though, it's about justifying it too. And this is a really, really important skill to build on, not just now, but right the way through senior school to GCSE and A-level. If I could have the next slide, please. When answering inference questions, the explain bit is the element that children can forget. They find what the author is hinting or inferring, but forget to explain. Again, the questions on each slide are targeted questions which you can ask when reading with your child to help them progress. I can have the next slide, please. To show inference and explain questions in action, I thought I'd use an example from this term's teaching at Embley. I created this unit of work for my Year 6 English teaching this term, and the theme is wolves and winter. And the two books we've been looking at are Wolf Wilder by Catherine Rundell and Michelle Paver's Wolf Brother. Two fantastic books if you're looking for some good books for Year 6 or possibly Year 5. Really, really good. If I could have the next slide, please. So here's an extract which I used from Wolf Brother. And to give a synopsis of the book, Wolf Brother is an exciting adventure set 6,000 years ago during the time of the hunter-gatherers. Torak of Wolf Clan is the main character, and his father's death at the hands of a gigantic bear inhabited by an evil spirit triggers Torak's quest to save the forest from destruction. So it's not for the faint-hearted, it's quite exciting though. So here we find our main character Torak in the woods and feeling scared. If I could have the next slide, please. Let's take a look at this 2-mark question about the passage and think about how we would tackle it. So the first thing to do is to break down the question. So first, what is the question word? If it's a what, your answer will likely be a noun. So it's figuring out what the question is and what it's all about. Then, what or who is the subject? Torak is the subject, so we know we're looking for information about him. So we're looking for his name in the text. The word frightening is important here because this is an inference question. The word frightening won't be there, so we'll be looking for other words for frightening, so synonyms, and also action or behaviours which show that he is frightened. And that's really important to teach children with these inference questions, that actually you can't just pick up the answer from the text, you need to work a bit harder and do some more detective work. If I could have the next slide, please. In doing this with Year 6, I then introduced 5 questions which require inference skills. So you've got 5 there. You've got the question, but you've also got a little bit afterwards, which we wouldn't usually be there. So things like explain how you know that, or why do you say that? But when you're working with them and supporting them, it just gives them, it reminds them what they need to add to their answer. If I could have the next slide, please. So we discussed the peel technique when we answer inference questions, and this is a really useful technique, again for now, but also for senior school as well. And this is how it's broken down. So P is for point. So what is the point? What is the question asking? Then E, you need to find evidence from the text and directly lift that. Then another E, you need to explain it. And then L, so you need to link back to the question to make sure you've answered it and all its elements, and then back to the text to make sure you've used the context. So that peel technique, as I say, can be used in all sorts of different ways. If I could have the next slide, please. So here is another waggle. So what a good one looks like for the question. Was Torak frightened? Explain how you know that. Now you'll note with the bullet pointing that the answer is broken down into 3 sections. Each part presents a piece of evidence which shows Torak was frightened and explains it. So it uses the peel techniques. You've got your evidence and you've got your explanation, which works well. So you'll see that explaining the evidence is really, really important. One top tip here when supporting your child is to make sure that they're not restating the question or restating the evidence when they're trying to explain it. So as an example, he woke with a cry means he cried when he woke. So children often do this. They find it hard to find other words to explain the piece of evidence. So choosing different vocabulary to explain the same thing is an important skill to learn. While you're reading, you could just say, oh, the word caught, what does that mean? What's a different word for that? So it's just a simple but effective way of developing this skill. So you're trying to sort of help with their development without making it too obvious, which is sometimes good. The correct example here being, it says Torak woke with a cry, and when you wake in this way, it means it's sudden and alarming. So this particular technique, as I say, is really, really, really helpful. If I could have the next slide, please. I mentioned when speaking to Catherine the role that visual literacy can play. It's not only great fun to use pictures and picture books to develop reading comprehension skills, but it's a great inroad for reluctant readers. There's a website which is fabulous called Once Upon a Picture, and this has great pictures to discuss and prompts for questions and can be useful for asking questions from our next strand of prediction. So if I could have the next slide, please. So if your child isn't keen to read or you wanted sort of a bit of a break and want to look at some pictures, as I say, it's a really super way of developing their reading comprehension skills. So this one, Pegged, it's a fun and striking image. There are a range of questions to ask. Giving it a new title is quite a good one, as it will get you talking and talking about inference. So what's the author or illustrator trying to show rather than tell, and all the elements that the author's hinting at. And as I say, it gives you the opportunity to discuss it with your child as well. Another example, if I could have the next slide, please, is called Crocodile. And it's a picture sort of filled with jeopardy. And there's all sorts of different pictures. You can have the thinking picture, prediction picture. There's loads to choose from, but this would help develop those skills of prediction and explanation as well. So there are lots of images for actually all different year groups, so it's worth having a look. If I can have the next slide, please. Right, so here's one for you to get involved with. We're going to watch a clip taken from the Literacy Shed. Again, I've used this in the past with Year 6 and they loved it. It will be asking you, I'll be asking you to predict what happens next. So when the clip is paused or when it stops, I'd like you to predict, and we'll try using the live event Q&A chat. So the sort of boxes at the top with the question mark in. And if you wanted to write in just a sentence or so of what you think will happen next after you've watched the clip. So let's hope this all works. and you can perhaps pause it and see if you can predict what might happen next. But it's worth a watch. It's called Ruckus, and as I said, I've used it really effectively with Year 6 before. If I could have the next slide, please. So moving on through Vipers, we get to R, which is retrieve. It's fairly straightforward. So once your poor children have worked their way through inference and explanation, it's quite nice to come to a retrieval question as well. But with this, I think sometimes you can think it's a simple answer, and you just have to make sure that you check the details of the question. So these ones are very, very precise. So is it asking you for a word or to copy 2 words, or find a phrase rather than a sentence? So if you're talking through a text and you want to practice retrieval questions, it's worth being quite precise with your vocabulary. Right, if I could have the next slide, please. So on to summary. So summarising, which is the final strand, this can be something you can do at the end of a book or a page or a chapter. And to us, it seems sort of quite simple, quite a simple concept. But actually, it can be quite a challenge to children, that they can find individual questions, but it's quite a lot of it could be real cognitive overload actually to try and think of a text as a whole and then distill it down to a summary. So again, there are some questions there which can help them to do that. And actually, if I could have the next slide, please, it's something that we do from a very young age, from reception in Year 1, and just last week, actually, Year 1 were ordering the story of Chicken Licken and then writing sentences about it. So here's an example. I don't think we'll use the parent chat for now, but if you could just have a look and see if you can think whether you know what the order might be, the correct order for this. So it's in the wrong order, it needs sequencing. So number 1, Jack sells the cows for beans. Number 2, Jack stole a hen that could lay golden eggs. Number 3, Jack's mum throws the beans away and a beanstalk grows. Number 4, Jack took the golden harp and chopped down the beanstalk. And number 5, Jack climbs up the beanstalk and takes a bag of gold. So with this, the children will have heard, and this is something you can do, the story already, and then between you kind of reorder it and see what you can do. So have a little look at that, and actually the correct order would be 1, 3, 5, 2, and then 4. So a way of helping them with that, you might start with, if they're struggling, right, what's the first thing that happens and what's the last thing that happens? So those are the easiest bits to find, and then look to see what happens in between. So again, it's just another example of predicting and sequencing that might be a fun way of helping at home. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? So a few final tips on encouraging those reluctant readers. Reading is reading, so encourage it wherever and whenever you can, and model yourselves as readers. So reading all sorts of different things, but just letting your child see you read, and also that you value reading, has a really positive impact. That sort of role modelling. Also, again, if your children are reluctant readers, are there people that your children admire who work in other fields? So it's worth double checking the quality of the texts, but these could include everyone from Bear Grylls to Darcy Bustle. So it's all about finding an inroad. So if they're not keen, then actually what's going to hook them? What's going to get them excited about reading and fiction? And actually non-fiction sometimes, if that's what they're interested in, could be the road into. When a particular author's fired up your child's imagination, but they've run out of books. So I know sometimes they're reading the same author for what feels like years, or they might run out of steam with that author. This website is really, really good. It's called Reader Teacher, and they've got a book match page for loads of different authors. And so if you were a fan, for example, of David Solomon's and had read all of his books, there are a number of books there within the same style that might grab your child. So so that's a really super help there. If I can have the next slide, please. And last of all, enjoy reading with your child. After all, the best reading environment is one where there's an expectation of pleasure in reading, where there's excitement in talking about books and enjoyment in being read to. We look forward to publishing the first in a series of Embley book recommendations tomorrow, starting with classic fiction titles for nursery all the way through to year 6. And there's still been some debate as to whether Stickman is a classic. I'm sticking to my guns and saying it is. So thank you for joining us this evening, and we hope to see you again for our next episode of Lessons from Our Kitchen Table on writing after half term, and hopefully teams will be a bit kinder to us. So if I could pass over to Cliff. Thanks very much.
Well, thanks very much, Shana. That was really, really super. And I think what I would share with the parents who gathered for this is just the very, very significant depth and extent of Shana's skill around English, and she hides her talents with a significant modesty, but she's nationally renowned and has considerable expertise in bringing reading on with children in prep schools and so forth. She'll kill me for saying that, but too late, it's out there now. So I think we've got a couple of questions that have come through, and there's a couple of things that I'd like to say by way of summary, but let's turn our attention to some questions. Charlotte, have we got a couple that we want to put in front of Shana?
Yeah, certainly. There's a couple of questions, Shana. Firstly, the difference between physical books and electronics. Do you find a difference in recognising and understanding words between physical books and electronic books?
I think like most things, it's lovely to get a mixture and actually to have that variety. I think visually reading from a screen and reading from a paper book, you get a slightly different experience. But when you're using a digital book, often you can look up vocabulary, which is fantastic actually to help sort of up level your reading. And also there's the audio aspect that you can actually hear the words as well, so you can use it in lots of different ways. So a sort of a paper book, you know, I love the smell and the texture of paper books, but actually a digital book can give you sort of different things, I would say. So both have their place.
Lovely, thank you. And just one other question. So we've had a mum of a year 3 child who said that my child finds reading sometimes difficult. So she's looking forward to some tips here. So hopefully we've provided some of those, and that the penny will drop. But I guess a question around that might be, you know, with parents who do find it a bit of a struggle, you know, getting their children engaged and into books. What sort of advice would you give to those parents and in those situations?
I think sometimes it's reading through stealth, so it's almost like they don't realise what you're doing. So using things like a really gorgeous picture, and not having the questions next to you, but just having those banked that actually you're just talking about a picture together, or going to an art gallery when we're allowed to, and talking through in that way. And I think children seeing our excitement and our passion for things. I mean, it's the same with teaching across the different subjects. If you show a passion, you ignite that fire and they get excited too. So interacting with the story, using puppets, being excited, I think gets them excited too. And also, as I said, if you can find things that they already like and enjoy, finding things that link with that. So as I say, whether that be people that they admire who are authors, or topics. So if they're into space, finding a space theme. So it's just looking for that inroad, I would say.
Great, thank you. And I think that's it for the questions for now. So shall I hand back to Cliff just to sum up? And I know you had a few other comments to make.
Yeah, thanks for that. I would probably make an observation for those parents who might be struggling a little bit to engage their children. Go gentle on yourself. Yeah, it's not your fault Children are individuals, and the fact that your friend's children are doing something different doesn't mean there's anything particularly wrong with your children. They are themselves, and they're making their own journey. I think you just need to recognise that. In the world we're in, there can be a great deal of focus on speed, how quickly you get something done, how quickly you're getting to the next stage, how quickly. Actually, in this instance, it's not a race. This is about a journey in life, and children progress at different speeds. So just be gentle with yourself. The other thing I would say is that we are here, and you know, places actually abounding with expertise around learning and curriculum development and reading and phonics and literacy and all the rest of it. So do come and buttonhole colleagues, get in touch with staff, talk to Shana offline, and share the concern. The classic list is going live on the website. I'm hugely intrigued by this because I think we've got very, very many rich and entertaining conversations around what makes that really list. And I suppose in many ways this is the first of those conversations. I really want to engage our parents with discussions around teaching and learning, around understanding what it is we're doing with children. Because education doesn't actually happen to them, it happens through them. And that also means it happens through you and your good efforts and understanding of your work as well. So carry on with what Shana describes, the Viper piece. For goodness sake, don't see that as a straitjacket. I don't think anybody on this call particularly wants to sit down and say, okay, sweetie, now we're going to go with the V's. What's the vocabulary here? And work through the diversity. That's, you know, it's an approach, and it's to be used with a degree of stealth, and the children will become familiar with it, and you can use it to do what you know. But it's not a kind of clunky, mechanistic approach. A little bit more subtlety to it, and I think you saw that in some of the examples. So I hope you're all keeping well in these strange times. It is lovely to see some of you coming and going. We look forward to whatever March will bring, and the return to school in the time. But you're here, we're still teaching and learning, the community at Embley is still engaged. I think, have we had a question that just come in, Charlotte? I'm conscious that, how do we structure the reading curriculum? It's a late one, Shana. Did you want to have a I think that's a very expansive question. How do we structure the reading curriculum?
Okay, so the reading curriculum, it varies. There's an awful lot. I've been a head of English before, and there's a lot to it. So it's a combination. I mean, things like reading comprehension, for example, it's not just about here's a text, here are some questions, let's answer it. It's about breaking it down, getting excited about it, hearing readers outside of those English lessons. For example, I mean, with my year sixes, we did Wolves of Winter, and you know, with online learning, and one of them's waving one of the latest books at me, waving Wolf Brother at me, and he's now on book 3, and we keep telling him to stop with his spoilers. So it's about, you know, it's about engaging them in what they're doing, and a combination of the sort of systematic teaching alongside igniting that passion for literature. I think that answers the question.
Yes, and a very, very very enthusiastic and thoughtful reply. It's also a very, very kind thought from the parent who sent that in to say she didn't particularly want to keep us. You're not keeping us at all. It's our delight to be able to be in your company. But I guess we probably should think about putting children to bed or having some supper or whatever it is you're getting up to in your individual houses. So from Shana, from myself and the team at Embley, from everybody who's involved in buffering video links and so forth. Sorry, IT guys. Don't you love it when a plan comes together? And a more prepared group of individuals you couldn't possibly hope to meet. But again, stuff happens. Yeah, let's put it Parkwood, Microsoft. But for us, for now, stay safe, look after each other, and we'll see you back soon for another session of lessons around the kitchen table. So for me, for us, bye-bye for now. Take care.